Hi, today we're going to run through a session creation tutorial to tell everyone how to make some interactive sessions using some of the rules in Trainz. And we've made a document online that you can read and step through to understand all the things in this video, or you can just watch the video. It's up to you. There's also a couple of tutorials, sessions, or a session example that we're going to provide for you to download, and you can use that as well. So I'll just run through the document, save you having to step through it yourself, so you can journey along with this video, or you can do it yourself by just reading the tutorial that we've got online. So what is a session? You can think of each session as its own gameplay experience for a route. You might make a passenger or a freight run from one location to another. You can add AI train traffic and give them specific orders to follow, so it makes the route feel like it's very much alive. You can even add cars, planes, boats to your session, and sessions are all about giving the user the best experience or gameplay and entertainment while you're in the route itself. So that basically what sums up a session, and we're going to go through today and show you some techniques on making a great session. When you first start wanting to create a session, you'll need to go into Trainz. So we'll load Trainz up now, and in Trainz you will find a main menu which has all your routes listed, and down here you'll either create a new route, but if you already have a route created, for instance we'll just use Kickstarter County, you go to view sessions, and under here are all your sessions, and there's a create session button down in the middle here, so that will get you started to create your own session. I would like to download the example, so I won't go into it yet. What we will do, I know the next part of the tutorial actually just tells you where the session rules are, so let me just run through that. To start creating a session for your route, select the route in the routes menu, which I just explained, and view sessions. Then once you are in the session selection for that route, there will be a button in the right hand side called create sessions. So we've just gone and done that. We've hit the create session button. We're now in a surveyor environment. You will be using the rules to create your session. Rules allow you to create gameplay throughout your session. In Surveyor, you can find the Session Rules button located at the top left of the screen. So in this particular image here, you can see it's this one here. If we go back to the game, let's make it full screen again. Up here, you can see that's the button that we want to get to. That's where you edit your session rules. So if we click that, it'll bring up the user interface for editing your session rules. So we jump back to the website. Under this section, you will find that each rule has an icon that you can select and edit the parameters of. You can also add and delete rules. So you've got your add, edit, and delete buttons there, which are down the bottom left-hand corner. Then you've got this window here, which has been shrunken down, and you'll find that you've got the name of the session up here. You've got the session description, which you'll need to enter in there. Make sure it's a nice detailed session description, because people will be reading that from the routes menu or the session menu for that route, so that they can determine whether they want to play your session or not. And then these are all your rules that you currently are using. There's plenty more you can add, but these are the defaults that get added for you when you create a new session. So rules can be placed on the far left hand side, which is the root level. So you can see here these are all on the far left hand side, so they're on the root level. Any rules placed in this root level will be executed on their rule parameters. So you can think of this as a loop, and Trainz goes through and runs down here and goes, I'll execute these rules when they are required based on their parameters. Or you can indent some rules. So some can't be indented with others, but let's just put a couple of messages in here, for example. And when you start to put child rules in, this child rule won't start until this parent rule has finished. So you can put as many child rules as you want. You can make them a couple of children of one parent. You can nest them even further down. So there's lots of different ways of indenting your rules and making the parents execute first before the children will. You can see there's buttons over here for indent, so you can click those. I was using control arrow keys, left and right. Control up and down moves your rules up and down for you if you want to do that. There's also up and down over here to promote or not. And I'll just, oh, you can also right click as well. So right click, indent, move up and down. So there's 3 ways of doing that. If you want to move your rules around to be children of others or be the parent. And that's pretty much what we've explained in these lines here. There's certain rules you can use so that children will be executed in different ways. So rules in which are listed as children can be processed in an ordered list, or they can be processed all at once. So this depends on how you structure your list. Use the simultaneous list or rule, or you can place the progressive list rule, and I'll explain those to you now. So let's just say we have a few rules. Let's put a couple of these in here. You can see how there's 2 equal icons underneath this main message, and let's just make a message up. I'll say message 1. So message 1 would display on the screen, and then once message 1's been cleared, this next child rule would start, which is called message child 1. So we know it's the child. And then we'll edit this one and we'll say message child 2. So we've got the main message, and then once that disappears, this message child 1 will show on the screen, as well as message child 2 straight away, because they're on the same level. They're 1 level down each, and they're saying this child rule will execute simultaneously, and this one will do the same. So they won't wait for one another. They'll just go, I'll execute and I'll execute. So we're going to get 2 messages at the same time. Now that's not what we want. We want this message to show, then we want this message to show. So you've got 2 options here. You can indent, which means this one will show, and this one won't. The next one won't show until the parent's been cleared, and then again this one won't show until the parent's been cleared. Or there's these special rules you can put in. One's called simultaneous list, which will always make these little icons show as equals, which means that anything under this list is going to get executed straight away. It'll execute all the rules straight away. They're not going to wait for one after the other. But if you change from a simultaneous list to a progressive list, so let's just indent them back, delete this rule, we go to a progressive list, we indent, you can see the icon now has changed from 1 to 2. So this means that this message, this rule will execute, and until it's finished, this next one won't start. So you can see the little icons there telling you which one's number 1, which one's number 2. So that's what a progressive list does. So you can add certain rules under these list rules, which will change the way they will execute. And that's very important, because sometimes you'll want all your rules under one list to execute all at once. Sometimes you'll want them to be ordered so that the one above them won't execute until the one below. The one below won't execute until the one above is finished. So that's just something to keep in mind. You don't have to use lists at all. You can indent a lot of stuff, but lists are quite handy to know about. So that's why we've just run through them there. There are other lists like randomized lists, and you'll see them in the rules there. But there are a couple other lists, but those 2 are probably the most handiest. This just says we've created a session with a lot of things in it that you can download at this link. So I'll download that now, and I will install that. Actually, we'll get out of this session that we were in, so I can install. Well, where are we? We should be here. Okay, that's the one we want. So once you download it, just extract it. There'll be two assets. One's the session itself, and the other one's just some HTML that the session relies on. And you can see that we've got a bunch of things in here, some example screenshots, thumbnail, but we'll go through them in a second just to show you and tell you all about those. So let's select both those assets we downloaded, go back to Trainz content, and I actually have already installed this, so we'll just delete that just so you guys know what the steps are. So let's pretend we didn't have it installed. We'd select both of these, drag them over to Trainz content, and it says it's installed them fine. You can see them there. If you filter on modification date, it'll bring them up as being the latest modified or installed, either one. So jump back into Trainz, and sample rules is under Kickstart Accounting. Sorry, if you go to select route, Kickstart Accounting, and sample rule, there's our big sample screenshot. Sample rule is the session that we've created for you guys to have a look at. So you can go to edit session, so that will bring up the session. I'll put here, this session is found under Kickstarter County. Yeah. Right. I'll turn some sounds off so we don't get too much happening in the background. But now. So we've got some compulsory session items in here that your session will need people to use it. We'll run through them now. So there's a description, which we explained before. If we go open our edit session rules, at the very top here, give it a name. Give it obviously a name, one that people will relate to. Sample rules is probably not the best one. For this tutorial it is. Then under here you've got your session description, and this is where you can go through and you type whatever you want to explain to the user in detail what your session's all about. So that's where you'll definitely need a session description. You can read some additional comments there that explains what the description is. The next rule we've got is a quick drive rule, and this one's already added for you when you create your session. It's called quick drive rule, and if you edit that, you'll find that there's a whole bunch of options that will help start your session for the user. So it's just a nice way of ticking a few boxes and a few radio buttons to set up your initial session. So it asks you, do you want to open the quick drive window when the session starts? Now the quick drive window gives users options to select what controls they want, whether they want DCC, which is easy mode, or they want CAD mode, which is more of a realistic approach. So that will be up to them whether they want to select that or not, and whether you give them access to it. So if you say open quick drive window when session is started, they'll get access to selecting easy or realistic mode. And then whether you tick this little box here which says enable gameplay session mode, if you tick that on, all the rest of the options will be disabled. So they'll only be able to change easy mode or realistic mode in that quick drive window if you've got this enable gameplay session mode on. If you remove that, then there'll be a whole bunch of other options, like they'll be able to add trains to the tracks, they'll be able to add a few other things and change the time of day and all sorts of things, because you haven't said it's a gameplay session. It's more or less you're giving them the option to change a lot more things. So if you leave that enabled, you limit what they've got to play around with, which is probably a good thing if you set your session up to be certain times of day, because some rules are triggered based on time. So you don't want to give them access to change a lot of stuff if you've set your session up correctly. But if you don't care, then you can untick that, and then they've got free reign to put whatever trains down they want in addition to what you've done. Change the weather, change the time, change a lot of other things there. So keep that in mind, that it's a good idea probably to put enable gameplay session mode and have that ticked so that they can't change a lot of your gameplay that you've put into your session. Again, it's up to you. So just to recap, because I went and jumped across to one there, quick drive window will show, and it gives them the options straight away. It shows straight away whether they want to select controls and other things if you haven't got this ticked. You can set the time of day in here. You can enable gameplay session mode on and off. I just explained that. Then enable in-game help by default. That's whether you want junction overlays to be shown or not. So usually turning that off is a good idea, because otherwise you get a lot of green and red arrows all over your route, especially when you're in the main yard and there's lots of junctions. So having that off is a pretty good idea, but again, it's up to you whether you want to enable or not. Set the default control method, easy mode or realistic mode, whatever you want to start with. Set the default derailment realism level to none, so they never derail. Arcade is a bit more easygoing, and then realistic is obviously, they're going to have to really watch what junctions are switched which way and all the rest of it. So again, up to you how hard you want to make it for the user, and then set your default metrics. I guess it's up to you where you are in the world, what your session relates to. So they're just a few things you want to set up for your session as it gets started. So that's the quick drive rule. That's a must to set up in terms of what we think. Session metadata. This is a good one to add. This is not added by default. You'll need to put this rule in. So sorry, I haven't even explained how to add a rule. If you just go to add, and if we find metadata, you'll see session metadata is there. You click on it, select the tick button, and now your rule's been added. So it's fairly easy to add these rules. You just need to know what you want to search for. So let's delete that one. We already had one added, and we'll edit that. And under here it says the type of session. Is it a challenge session, which is kind of like an arcadey gameplay scenario, or is it simulation? So it's actually real world. This is what you do. So you can switch between those two. A lot of our sessions are obviously simulation. The length, you can determine how long the session goes for on average. This session is a 30-minute session. This session is an hour 20. Whatever you want to put in there, you just put it in as minutes. And then the difficulty of your session, whether it's a tutorial, normal, easy, hard, expert. And then once you've saved this out, this will show in the routes, the session menu for your route, so that people can read your description, and they also get these additional bits of information. They show up in the right-hand corner of the session menu that tells the user how long it will take them to play, how hard the session is, and whether it's a simulation session or an arcade session or challenge session. So you want to have that in there just to give them a bit more info. Then you've got a couple of other rules that I'll run through in a second. One we haven't actually added in here that we should. Doing a bit of editing on the fly here. Is your category region. So category region, and I'll fill that in a sec. It's just a reminder for me to remember to do that. Is, let's go in here, category region. This just is another element that shows up in the routes menu. You can't do this from in your session rules itself, but what you can do is you can put this in your config file, so that I'll just exit out of this just to show you where it shows up. In your session menu for your route, so we're under Kickstarter County, samples of rules, it says it's a 30-minute session, it's normal, and the location, this is where we can update the location. We can see it's a simulation session. The location says generic, but we might want to have it as the UK, for example. So we'll just back out of there. We'll jump into where our session rule asset is, our sample rule. So we'll open our config up, and under here, I don't believe that we will have the tag in there already, but it's the tag you're going to use is category region. We do. And 00 is generic, so it's not showing, it's going to show up as generic. It's nowhere in the world, basically. It's fiction. So if we wanted it to be UK or US, you type in US, UK, or any other listing that you'll find on our wiki, but it's pretty common sense. You know, AU is Australia, so you put that in. It might even be. We'll just put in the US. That'll do. So we pop in the US, save that out, and that's pretty much how you do the location for in the menu to show up there. So we're gonna delete our sample rule, and we're gonna drop this in the changed one that we had. And then if we jump into Kickstarter County and go to sample rules, we might have to restart. And I'll double check that config. US, yep. Close that down. Open him back up. Okay, if we go in here, I think it's going to inherit the route itself. So you can probably scrap what I've just said there, and as long as your route's set up as a correct category region, then that'll transfer over to your session as well. So as you can see that all of these are generic. Whereas if we take something like ECML, it says Great Britain, and all the rest of them are going to be Great Britain. Okay. It's a good idea to put that in your session anyway, because later on, if we do end up changing the menu and we do it per session, that's going to be in there. So that's just explains to you how you actually do it anyway. Yeah, be sure you still put it in there. So let's go back into our sample rules, back to our website, close that down, and we do have a message pop-up rule we'll go through next. We were showing you that one before. So the message pop-up rule, this is this one here. It's a good idea. I'll run through what actually is said in this document, because it's going to help you out how to use this. Every session should at least use the message pop-up rule shortly after the session starts to indicate what the player should be doing. Any message pop-up rule should never exceed more than 6 lines of text. That's because these sessions are actually, you can see here, there's only a small amount of text in this one. It is an example tutorial though. But if we run this session, you'll see that you'll see that the the message pop-up window is not very big. But yeah, we'll select our controls. Once our camera finishes panning, the message pop-up should happen. There we go. So you're not going to get a lot of information within that message box, but the idea is not to provide a whole big massive amount of text that the user has to read before they even begin playing their session. They don't want to sit there and read a novel. You just want to give them a couple of little instructions, get them on their way, and then when they get to another point where they need to do something, you show a few more lines of information. So you want to hold them through your session, or handhold them through your session when it's needed, not provide them with a whole bunch of information that they have to read and remember, or at least try and come back to and read it all again once they're halfway through their session. So that's where our message pop-ups and these little navigation points come into play. They really help the user get little snippets that they can easily remember. You don't want to tell them a 19-digit number and tell them to remember it. You just want to tell them a few little things so that they can hang on to that, and then you give them the next few numbers later. So let's go back into editing. So that's your message pop-ups. So you can use them everywhere, and make sure you just provide enough information so that it's not going to overwhelm the user. Then you've also got objectives. Now objectives are these rules here. objective add. So if you want to find any of these rules, we've highlighted in apostrophes what the rule name is. So it's easy enough to just go add, message shows up, or objective, add, check, update. So they're all there. It's not hard to find them. So we've added this objective add rule. We edit that one. Now this has a unique objective ID, and you can make that whatever you want. I've called it obj1. They do have to be unique for the specific objectives, and you can obviously use these names for other rules, but I would try and make most of them unique if you can, just so you can remember them. So objective 1, its display name is just a string that I've typed in. It's called collect cards for delivery. And then the icon that I want to appear up in the top right hand corner where the objectives show, I've said couple. That's the icon I'm going to use. You can use whatever you want. The priority is normal, which means it'll be done in the same priority as others unless there's some urgent ones. It's how it shows in the list. And then completion target's 1, so there's no more steps to this. There's only one step, and that's once you've done this, it's over. You don't have to do any more for this particular objective. If you have more targets you have to complete, then they have to update this a few times, but that gets a little bit more complicated. It's not hard, but we'll explain that another day. And then you put a string in here, or a message that once they click on the objective up in the top right hand corner, it will show that message here that you've written. So that's the objective add, and we'll go and show you what it looks like in game in a second. But once you once the user starts to get through your session and you want to complete the objective, you would go to, let's have a look. Here we go. Objective update is the other rule you would add, and it says marks the object obj1 as complete. So if we edit that, you put the unique object ID in, which would be obj1, because that's what we named the objective add. And then the mode is set objective as complete, and you can also have a bunch of other different parameters that you can set. Increment progress is all about that. I forget the name of it. I'll go have a look. I'll just get the right information to you. This one here, completion target 1. So if you were to go into here and update, you could change this to say increment progress, so it would go from 1 to 2 to 3 until it gets to the number that you had up there, and then it becomes complete. But for simplicity, we're going to set the objective as complete. That's what we're going to do. As soon as this rule fires, it's going to set this objective complete, and that rule is based on a bunch of other things which I'll quickly run through. It's checking whether the consist has been coupled up with those wagons we've told it to, and then once it does, we're going to check that it hasn't already been completed before, because they can easily decouple and couple again to make it happen again. And then it'll run all these rules here. And this one here, it'll run them simultaneously because we've been through what that means. And this rule here is going to make our objective complete. So if we jump back into our session, you'll see that as the game starts, the objective's already there. Collect cards for delivery. You get a little bit a list of objectives that come up here, and we'll close our quick drive rule. So there's our hoppers, there's our messages, a few other messages that show that we've told it to. So we can click on our collect cards delivery and a little for delivery, and this is the message window that pops up. It tells us the message that we put in that rule. It gives us the couple icon. And that's just a little bit of helpful information for people who may be traveling a long way, or they just want to know where they're up to. So that's what the objective is. I guess people can also jump back to toggle their instruction messages and go back to the instructions that you gave them. But the objectives are always on screen, which is a good idea to always have objectives. So once we couple with this, that rule that updates the objective is going to fire. You'll see it go green. Just couple there. So this has gone green, and then it'll go away because that's been completed. The objective's been completed now. So if we tick that, you see another couple of objectives have come in now because we've set them up in the session rules, and a new navigation point is now telling them to go somewhere else. We jump back into Surveyor. Objectives are very handy to guide people to their goals and what they need to do, as well as navigation points. So that's objectives. That's the add rule that we went through. You can check the status as well if you needed to find out whether an objective has been complete. So that would be a rule called objective check. We'll add that in and it'd go edit. It says wait for unique ID, and we go obj1. And it waits for the completion of that rule, waits for the failure of that rule, or waits for a certain progress, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever you put in there. So if we wait for the completion, that rule would sit there waiting for the obj1 rule to be completed, and once it's completed, it would fire, and any subsequent children underneath that would get executed. Obviously, it doesn't have any children at the moment, but that's how it would work. So we delete that. Then the notifications, these are really handy, and you should use these wherever possible to highlight all the different things you want your user to do so that they never get lost, because it's a 3D element that sits in the world, and there's a bunch of them that you can use. So we'll run through them now. Up here, first of all, when you want to add them, you'd use a navigation display rule. So we go navigation display. And there's a bunch of other rules associated with it, which we'll run through soon. But the navigation display, which has the little plus icon, that's the one you add. And then you'll edit that, and you'll give it a unique ID. I've just called mine nav1. You can make them specific to a train, so that if the user is focused on a particular train, this set of navigation points will show up. If you don't put a train in there, they will always show up no matter which train the user has selected. So that's quite handy as well. If certain different trains want different sets of navigation points, then you just set up what vehicle should have this set of navigation points when the user is focused on that train only. So that's quite handy. Then there's 3 radial buttons here, which are the options in which the navigation points can be completed in. All points must be completed in a sequence. That means as we start to add more and more of these down here, navigation point 1 will show before any of the rest of them will, which is a little bit of a lie, because while you're on number 1, number 2 is very transparent, but it does show a little bit, so you can see if you're close enough to it, it'll show what's coming up next, but it's just more or less a little bit of a guide. Number 1's the one that you're aiming for, so it's 100% opaque, and is the one that you should be focused on. So all points must be completed in a sequence. So 1, 2, 3, that's how that'll be done. If you change it to points, will be completed in a sequence, but can be skipped. So if they were on 1, but they went to 2 instead of completing 1, then that's fine as well. Or there's all points must be completed, but in any order. So they'll all show at once. All the navigation points will be all shown at once, and the user can do them however they like. The general one that we use is all points must be completed in a sequence, but again, it depends on what your session is. So let's get rid of these 2. We don't need them. This one's the couple icon, or the couple navigation point that we see. We've put it on car 4. So we selected car 4 within the list, and then we gave it an icon of couple. You can use whatever icon you want, like proceed forward is a good one to just put on track markers down the track, in which along stretches where you want the user to know where they're headed. So you can put a couple of track markers a few miles apart and just put proceed forward, and that will, once the user gets to that track marker or that navigation point, then the next one will show, which is a few more miles down the track, which has a proceed forward. So you kind of get a bit of a path going for them. Stop, turn around, all these icons can be used, however, in whichever situation you have the use for them. Then there's a little display text, which is what displays above the navigation icon. If you don't have any text, there won't be any text displayed, but I put coal hoppers just so it identifies what the object is. And style is very important. Now there's 3 options here. One's automated, one is manual, and one's require stop. So automated means for certain things like if you were traveling towards a track marker and it said proceed forward, it would, once the user gets within a certain distance, which is a meter or so of that track marker, then if it's automated, this navigation point will complete and the next one will start, because it automatically just knows that the user got close enough. If you set it to manual, then you need to check that the user got close enough to your navigation point, and then you need to remove or complete that navigation point in order for the next one to start. Or if you put require stop, the user has to stop at that navigation point in order for this navigation point to complete, for the next one to start. So they're the three options you've got. I'm using manual at the moment because I want to check that my user has connected with the coal cars I'm telling it to. So anything where you couple or decouple, you want to manually check it, and I'll show you how to do that. But if you're getting them to go to a certain location, automatic's quite fine. Or if it's a passenger stop, for example, you might want to put require stop, because you don't want them to just fly through the station, because they will get to the location you want them to be at, but you want to make sure they stop so that they're going to actually pick up their passengers. So we'll set that to manual like it was, and you'll see here as I go down further, this rule here is what's going to complete our point 1 in navigation point set nav1. So if I explain that more, this is our set navigation unique set ID is nav1. That's the set of navigation points, and this is point 1. Okay, I've only got 1 point in this particular set of navigation points, but you can have many more. But for this one, I've only got 1. And then I've added a navigation point complete rule, which if you went navigation point complete, right there, you'd add that. And I go edit, and it says mark navigation point. I've chosen 1 because I know that's the spot I want, or that's the navigation point I want, to complete in set nav1. Okay, so that's what that rule is going to do when it fires, which means it'll mark that point off, that navigation point off. So in here, it's in the root directory. So when the parameters of this rule execute, which I've gone, this rule is called a consist check. So I'm going to check what consist exists, and this rule will fire when it says complete whenever a train matching the description exists. And I've got my Kanawha Steam loco, my Kanawha Steam tender, and then car 4, 5, and 6 are the ones that consist right there needs to exist in order for this rule to fire. I can add more if I had any more. I don't have any more items in my session. Don't have any more trains. So if we deleted 6, we go in here and we go, okay, I'll put car 6 as the last one. So you can build up your specific vehicles. You can say vehicle types, or you can actually make it a driver, or you can use a bunch of combinations. So you don't have to use specific vehicles. But this consist check checks if something exists in the world, and usually you want to do a consist, but you can say if this particular driver exists in the world, or a specific set of vehicles, or a vehicle. So it's very good to check if things exist or have been coupled together to make a bigger consist. So that's what we're checking here. We're making sure that the loco that you start with has been coupled with these 3 hoppers, and when that happens, we're going to fire this rule and start to execute our child rules. Now we've got our next rule, which says a variable check rule. Now we've made the reason why we've made this rule here is because the consist check rule, this is going to fire every time this set of vehicles are connected. So if I was to connect this up, it would fire. Then if I disconnected my Steam loco and tender and then connected up again, it would fire again. And we don't want to keep firing this rule off and having all these rules continue executing. So we've put a variable check in as the second child, and it's called, we've named it, I'll edit that, we test that the variable consists underscore complete is less than 1. So when you create a variable, it's going to start as 0. So we're checking that the consist complete variable, which is what we've given the name, is less than 1, and we're saying this condition will be evaluated only once. So once that consist gets connected together, we're going to say check this variable, and if the consist underscore complete variable is 0, then continue executing its child rules, and we've got a simultaneous list rule so that they all execute at once. And then once this rule has come through and executed, we want to make sure that our consist complete variable goes to 1. So it changes from 0 to 1, and we're doing that with a variable modify rule. So we're saying change variable consist underscore complete to 1, so that it's no longer 0, it's now 1, so that if the consist is connected again, like the tender gets connected to car 4, so if this consist gets connected again at any stage in the session, it'll come through here and it'll go, if the variable consist underscore complete is less than 1, which it won't be because here we've changed it to 1. So it's not going to be less than 1, so it'll just bail out and none of these rules will execute ever again. So it will only happen once, and that's what we want to happen. So in certain circumstances like this, we have to check to make sure that this rule doesn't keep firing and executing the rest of this, the child rules, because we don't want to keep adding, like for instance, the variable modifier, we want ranking points. Add 200 to the ranking points. We don't want to keep adding 200 every time we connect our consist up. So we'll explain what ranking points are soon, and we don't want to try and keep cancelling or completing our point 1 completion, navigation point 1 in navigation point set nav 1 all the time. We don't want to keep updating our objective. So for instance, we just want to fire off this once. So once that fires, we come through, we complete our navigation point, which I just explained how that works. We complete our objective, which we've been through that. We are actually setting a junction, which is neither here nor there. We have to set that in order to get to the next location, otherwise the user has to set it manually. That's just another rule that we've added. And this add 200 to variable ranking points we'll explain in a second. So we're going to see how the rules work together in the session itself. So if we jump into our session, and we'll try and explain it as we're doing the session. So here we are, we're zooming in with a cinematic camera. We'll explain that, how that works. It stops, our message pop-up appears, and a bunch of other messages. We then have our objective showing. So this is it. The session's now waiting for the user to do something. As we go back, it's going to use the consist check rule to see if this vehicle here, this consist here is connected with this consist, and once that consist as a whole exists, we're going to see that rule fire. So now it's fired. It's then showed a message. It's completed the objective itself, and it's added 200 points to our ranking points, and then it's done everything it's needed to do. So that rule's now complete. So we've checked that the consist existed, and it's all happy. So it won't ever happen. It won't ever fire again. For example, if we uncouple that, we move forward, and then we go back again, you'll find that the rule will be happy. It won't ever fire again because we put that variable in place. Otherwise, if we didn't, it would keep firing and trying to find the navigation point again, and you get a few errors show up. So that's important to know. So we go back into our rules here, and I'll start explaining a few other things with navigation points. They're quite handy to know as well. In our rules, you've got things like wait on navigation point. So these are quite handy. If we add that rule, it would be not nav, you would go wait. And as you scroll down, you'll find it. Wait, sorry, that's not the right one. There it is. Wait on navigation point. And you'd add one of them. you'd edit that, and it says wait for navigation point 1 in set navigation 1 to be completed. So we've specifically said that we want point 1 in our navigation set that we named nav1 to be completed. Once that actually happens, then these child rules will fire. So this is just sitting there waiting until that happens. So this is a good way to progress through your sessions, this particular rule here. So using navigation points and the wait on navigation point rule is a great way to wait until the user has completed some of the things you've suggested or asked them to do. Once that happens, we're saying pop this message up, which we have seen. Well done, now drive to the industry. And then once they close that message down, it's going to show the next message, which I've just said message 2. And another set of navigation points are now going to display. And this is called nav2. It's not assigned to any train. It's doing all the points in sequence. And it's saying the first icon is actually fixated on industry 3. It's an unload icon. It's saying industry 3, cars 4, 5, and 6 is the text that will show above the navigation point, and it's manual because we're unloading. So loading, unloading, decoupling, coupling are all manual operations you need to check for. And then after we finish that, it's saying to proceed to a track marker, and it's automatically checking we get there. And then it's saying go to industry 2 and stop, and it's saying it requires a stop. So these are all going to fire off once the first one finishes, the next one will show, and so on and so forth. And then we've got a couple of objectives we're adding as well, which will show up. So car hoppers to the industry, and then we're saying park your train. So that's going in line with the navigation points that we've got there as well, which is unload at the industry and make a stop at this industry, which is really park your train. So few navigation points we're adding, then we're adding some objectives, and that's the next step of where the user starts off in the session or continues on in the session. So how are we doing? Let's have a look. Industry unload. Instead of following the session, I'd rather follow the tutorial online. You can read through the session yourself at a later date, or we probably will get there as we progress through this. If you have a set navigation point, we've done that one. Complete the points, we've explained that one, and we've also explained the wait on navigation points rule. Then there's a navigation set and show and hide. So if you were to, this one's showing the navigation points for navigation point 2 after navigation point 1 set is complete. But if you were to put a whole bunch of navigation display rules in here, you can hide some of them. So if we call this nav A, and we call this nav B, you'll find that all of these, and let's just pretend that we put a whole bunch of navigation points in here, you'll find that all of these will display at once, and you mightn't want that. So what you can do is you can go navigation, show hide, and you just give it hide the navigation point set nav A, and you'd need to make another one as well, nav show hide, and we'll put that under that one. Hide the navigation point set nav B, and you'll find that these now won't show because you've actually told them to hide. So this one's the only one that's going to show. And then you can just use this rule somewhere else when you want to actually show them later on. So that's another way of displaying or of setting up all your navigation points for the entire session and just hiding them at the start and just revealing them as you need them. Or you can use the method that I've used where you show or you create the navigation points when you need them at certain stages. But just make sure that they exist when you go to check them. Otherwise, you'll get some script errors. But it's not hard to set that up. So next thing, that's our navigation points, and they're very well worth having in there as well. We've got them as compulsory. Then there's some recommended session rules that are in here, which are things like wait on derailment. So in this session here, we've set up 4 sets of rules. So there's going to be wait on derailment, speed check, coupler breakage, and one other one. Oh, red signals. I'll have to get that in there as well. So you can easily copy with Control V and paste, and it'll paste this rule and all its children into another session or into this particular session again. So that's pretty handy, so you don't have to recreate everything. If you're doing it in build 82718 or thereabout, I think we've just got a bug in at the moment that needs to be fixed for this. So when the next update comes, this copy paste functionality will be fixed, which is not far away at all. So this is a handy thing to do when you copy and paste. You can paste this wait for derailment rule. You can actually edit this. You don't have to keep it the way it is. It's totally up to you. But what this does is it sets a variable called derailed to 1, so that you know that variable is set to 1, and you can check it later on if you're trying to complete something, but the user has derailed. You'll know because the variable's been set to 1 once they derail. We're taking all their points away. We're showing a message, which is actually part of HTML asset, which you download part of this sample, so that you don't need to rewrite that over and over again. That's explained in another tutorial on our Twitch TV page if you want to check that out, how to do HTML strings and all that. There's definitely a great tutorial on that. And then we're waiting 15 seconds and we're ending the session. So the player's derailed, the session's no longer playable. We've told them about it, what they've done, and it's ending the session. So that's the derailment one. This one's a speeding check. It goes through and basically takes 50 points off them each time they speed. And you'll need to make sure that you set your train driver to the one that the user's using. So if this guy's not correct, you'll need to select another train driver. Otherwise, it's not going to bring the train to a stop, wait 10 seconds, and then allow them to go again. You'll just get the points deducted and they'll keep speeding. So you might want to set him up correctly. Or again, you don't have to use these rules. If this is not what you want to do when they're speeding, you can completely rip this out and you can change it to do whatever you want. These are just suggested rules that make it easy for you if you just want to copy and paste it straight into your new session. Again, a couple of the breakages in there. It has a bit of an explanation as to what happens when the coupler breaks, and the red light, passing through a red light, they deduct some points and tell them a message. I think there's actually some sound files that actually talk to it, like audio files that a bit of voiceover that tells them what they've done wrong or what they shouldn't do. So those 4 rules there are what's explained here. Again, you can copy and paste them into your sessions and use them as you feel. So once we move on from that, there's a little bit more info on coupler breakage if you want to read it. There's a ranked session begin and complete rule. Now, this is used if you want a points-based system for your session. Okay, so if you want to give, well, players like to know how well they've driven their session and have an incentive to improve their driving skills. The points-based system evaluation can assist the player in understanding where they've made a mistake or performed sub-optimally without requiring them to immediately restart the session. So this ranked session functionality allows you to do that. It's quite handy to have. Use the ranked session begin rule to begin using this functionality. So we've added it in here, and I'll find, that's the rule we've added. Begin session, ranked session begin, and if you edit that, you've got 5 stars that you can add points to. You can change the points to be whatever you want. I've got it as 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, and then you have the option of having a session timer in there if you want. I haven't. I've put it as none, so there's no session timer. But if they're trying to stick to a certain amount of minutes to get to somewhere, that's a good idea to put the timer in. Or if they're trying to beat something, or they've only got a certain amount of time to get something done, then a countdown timer is also in there. I've just put it as the stars though, so they're just going to get points awarded to them so that they know what each thing's worth. So we add that in as a ranked session begin rule. And then as we progress, this is where I was saying about the ranking points. So as someone progresses and does something correct, I go and add a variable modify rule, which is variable modify rule. And we edit a variable called ranking underscore points. And that is how you change the little stars and points that show up in the UI for driver. So I'm adding 200 to a variable called ranking underscore points. That's a special variable that is associated with our ranking points or our score within a session. And that's it. If you want to deduct points, you'll change add to subtract, or you can change them to exactly a certain amount of points, but subtract's probably where you want to be with the ranking points, and it'll subtract 200 from ranking points or whatever amount you tell it. Okay? And then when you've finished your session, instead of actually terminating with an end session rule, end session fades out over 5 seconds and then it'll immediately go back to the session menu. What you'll want to do is you'll want to use this rule called ranked session complete. And I've got a couple of instances here. As long as one of these only fire throughout my session, I'm fine. So just make sure if you're adding multiples of these, which you will want to, only one can ever fire. So ranked session complete, we edit that. It says set the active ranked session as failed, and then it waits 20 seconds, and if the user hasn't this brings up a menu that says do you want to play again or exit. But if the user hasn't clicked anything, then we'll automatically exit the session for them. Otherwise, if everything's all well and good and they've done the session correctly, we'll run this rule again, rank session complete, add that, and then we've set it to actually complete, and we've actually added a customized message here that just says, well done, nice job today. And that gets added to the other additional message that will show, and there'll be a little bit of stars that show up, and it'll tell them how well they've done throughout the session. So it's just a nice way of giving them a bit of feedback for what job they've done for the day or for the session. So that's the ranked session complete rule, and that goes hand in hand with the ranked session begin rule. So once that's done, there's other rules that you might want to look at, like the cinematic camera. This is good for highlighting particular objects, usually accompanied with text, to recognize objects in the future, or to show what's happening in a session. It might be out of the player's control. As it says, this can be used to show what is happening while making it clear that the user does not have control. An appropriate choice of camera angles can help ensure that the player understands where the object is located on the route. You can choose the loco or signal to focus on, and then choose the type of animation you want for the camera. There's stationary, there's one where it circles the object, and then there's one where it moves from one location to another. It's up to you, obviously, what you decide on. You can see when we first start the session up, which is here, we've added this in the root directory, so that this camera runs straight away, and it's saying, lock my camera controls for this duration so the user can't move the camera. We're not preventing the train from moving, but you can have the option to do that as well. And we've targeted our canoa, so we've clicked on there and we've targeted the canoa to focus on. And then we've done this move from one point to another. So in a total time animation of 7 seconds, we're going to lock the camera for 7 seconds. We're going to have our pitch at 30 degrees, our yaw at 359 degrees, and our zoom at 300 meters back from the object. And we're going to make our way to a pitch of 20, a yaw of 30 degrees, and a zoom of 30 meters from the object. So that's where you see this kind of swoop in, zoom right into the object or the canoa at the very start. Now, to find out what pitch, yaw, and zoom do, you can just jump on Google, and there's a million pictures that tell you all about that stuff. So if you just want to find out what axis each of those rotate around, your pitch is probably going to be X or Y. Your yaw is going to be your again, like I said, go on Google. It'll tell you how it all works. Otherwise, you can circle the object, or you can remain stationary. They're the other options you've got. So that's once that camera finishes, we wait 2 seconds, and then all our windows pop up is what you see at the start there. And it's a nice way of introducing the session, and then we've got some custom messages which you might want to copy and paste these through as well, which show help on finding the location and map instructions. The next one shows you, I think, junction instructions, how to toggle the junctions on, and then the final one shows you how to get back to the session instructions. So you can copy those and put them in your own sessions as well, or you can copy the whole thing, or even copy the top one, and it'll also copy the child rules as well. So that's your cinematic camera. You can add as many of them as you like throughout the game. And then you also might want to think about what gameplay you want to do, which will determine what rules you're going to use. So, is it a passenger run, freight run, shunting, schedule run? Are they operating multiple trains? These are just a couple of the many gameplay ideas you can come up with. And then you've got different events we've added in there that you can have a look into, where, again, camera control has been mentioned. This is not just your cinematic camera. Camera control exists where you can, let's have a look. If I can remember the name of it. Set camera. And if we were to say set camera, and I apologize for some of these rules, they are in black text from older days, and we've changed the skin, and the rules itself haven't been updated, so you might need to do a little bit of squinting. But perform the following operations on the in-game camera. So it says set the target objective of the camera, and that means it'll focus on a junction, a map object, a vehicle, and you set that to focus on it. Or change the camera view mode to be, and you can click on this to be cab mode, external mode, tracking view, free roam, so you can force the player to be in a certain camera mode. Or you can set the camera flags to enable or disable user access of the camera. So if you only ever wanted them to be in cab mode, you go cab mode view, you go set the camera mode flags to enable or disable user access, and we go tick all these off, because all we want them to do is be in internal view mode, and that would be it. And then the user would be stuck in cab mode for the entire session unless you gave them the option to get out of it. So that's set camera rule. There's a 1,000 rules you'll be able to look through and discover. We won't be going through all of them today, but that's just one that you can set your camera options for the user, or at certain times force them to do certain things to make sure that they're on the right angles with the cinematic camera, or they're in the right mode with the set camera rule. Show hide layers is a good one, and this one, as it explains here, is there's a layers tutorial that we've already done previously, so you should check that out on our Twitch TV channel. This one's a good one about how to show objects that are on new layers at certain times, instead of having I don't know, it's kind of like a bit of a special thing. So check out the video. It's quite cool what the hide show layer functionality does. Trigger checks, they're quite easy to do as well. We've got a video on that on our Twitch TV. I'll add the URL in here. But that's just checking. Trigger check goes through, and we're in this particular instance, we've got a trigger called Industry 3, which we've added. It waits for the child rules to complete, even if no trains are present in the rule triggers. And once that rule triggers, so this any train goes through this trigger at Industry 3, then the rest of these are going to try and fire as well. These are resource checks, resource check rules, which I think are next or somewhere. We've been through the conscious checks. So the resource check rules, these check for commodity increases or decreases. So if there's certain coal levels that are lower than when you thought that what you needed, or if you need them to increase by a certain amount, this is your resource check rule you can use. here I'm doing it so that I know when car 4 has unloaded its coal. So I'm saying not watch an industry queue, I'm going watch a vehicle queue, and I'm saying this car 4, which is the vehicle that I should have coupled, its queue, which is called load, and the product, which is called coal, and you can get these by clicking on them. See, there's only one queue, so that's what I wanted, load, and the product called coal, because there's only one product that it's stocked, and the amount is when 1, which I've entered, complete when the designated queue falls below the required amount, and that's the amount that I put in. So what it's saying is there's obviously more than one piece of coal in my coal car. When the queue falls below 1, then we're going to fire this rule. Okay, so it fires, it goes to the next one, does the same check for coal car 1, so that gets unloaded. It does the same check for coal car 6. Sorry, 5 was meant to be the previous one. 6, and that gets unloaded. And once all 3 of these are unloaded, it then runs through, it gives me some ranking points, it marks off a navigation point to say that I've completed it, and it then does some sort of cinematic camera work, it marks off an objective, and then it changes my coal car delivered variable to 1 so that I can check later on whether that's actually been done or not. So that's fairly straightforward, hopefully. And we've explained how variables work with the variable modify and variable check rule. So that's just some session information and rules that you'll want to check out. Just jumping forward onto marketing, these are fairly important as well. You want to make sure that you open your asset open for edit. So if we jump into here, this is the session we're editing. If you go to Trainz Content or Content Manager and open for edit and show in Explorer, you'll see that in this particular example we've got 3 images, 1, 2, 3, that are all 1280 by 800. There's 3 screenshots there, and we've got a thumbnail which is 240 by 180. And this is what you want to have in your sessions. These marketing shots are important. The first one will show for anything that's not DLC, and the next 3 will show for anything that is DLC. And you can see that in here. Just let me log out. Sorry, another instance that's running. Oh, I completely got out of Trainz. There we go. So here you go. You can see that this one's not a DLC session, and the large image is being shown as the marketing shot. So that's where you get your nice crisp resolution shots for your screenshots. If you only got the 240 by 180, it's going to stretch it up and make it look rather ugly. So get your big 1280 by 800 screenshot in there. And if it becomes DLC, you'll see that you get the 3 options show up here for people to click and have a look through your session. And the way you actually get this to work is make sure you've done those 4 images. So 3 at 1280 by 800 and 1 at 240 by 180, which is your thumbnail. Name them accordingly, and you want to have this particular piece of code or snippet of information in your config. So copy paste that, open up your config file, and you'll see that I've got it copied at the top. It's under the thumbnails container, and the image 0 is called 0.jpg, and that's what we've named our first one, 0.jpg. 1.jpg's there, 2.jpg's there. They're all 1280 by 800. And then we've named the default one, which is thumbnail.jpg, which is 240 by 180. And you can see that one's here. And then Trainz knows that that's the information in your asset folder that it needs to use when it's showing its images in the routes or sessions menu. In particular, this one's a session, so it's going to use it for that. So it's quite easy. Once you've done that, you've got your images and you've got that in the config, you'll go ahead and just commit that, submit edits, and it'll go and work itself out. It should say you're all fine, and that will make sure that everyone gets a nice screenshot to look at for your session as well in the sessions menu. I think the last one, which was requested on the forums, which I'm just going to touch on, is the guard whistle. someone was asking that they wanted to know how to do put the guard whistle in at certain times, so we'll just pop that one in this tutorial. So sorry it's at the very end, but obviously you can scroll straight to the end if you need to know that, and I'll mention that in the forums. So we want to use the guard whistle. Let's just say we'll put the guard whistle at the very end of all this information. So straight away the cinematic camera will go, then once we get to the loco, it'll wait 2 seconds, and then all these messages they'll need to scroll through, and then once they've completed these messages, we'll get the guard whistle to sound. So let's go play sound, and we might actually, we'll put it in line with this one here, but we want, what do we want? We want this list to be simultaneous so that they both play at the same time. See how they're not? That says 2, that says 3. We're just going to put them under one another. So now these are on the same level, and the message pop-up will show, just this one, not its children, and this sound will play. And we'll go, play the WAV file default.wav of HTML asset, and we want it to be guard whistle. This comes with Trainz, or Trainz New Era anyway. Guard whistle, click that, and to know that it's default.wav, I do know it is, but we'll just duck and have a look in here, and I'll type in guard whistle, and it's this built-in one, and once you actually open it up, you can see that it's default.wav is the file that you'll want to be trying to call there. But it's an easy one to do. You don't need to check the file because it is default.wav. But another things you might want to check to make sure it is called that. I'm going to revert that one back. So play the WAV file default.wav, and that WAV file is usually whatever you are trying to call. In this instance, it's default.wav of HTML asset guard whistle, which is built into Trainz. And then this one, the rule completes when sound has just started. So we don't care about that one. We haven't got any children, but that's what we're going to keep it as anyway. So now it says plays the default.wav sound file of HTML asset guard whistle. So what you're going to find, we'll jump in. I'll turn the sound up. So hopefully it actually, you can hear it. Apologies for too much sound over the top of me talking. So now the session starts up. It zooms into our loco, and once we've got there, two seconds later, it's going to sound. There you go. So that's how you put a guard whistle in. You can just do the play sound. The other option, if you wanted to not use that play sound rule, if you didn't want to use the rule there, the message pop-up now has a built-in rule that plays sounds as well. So we just edit that. It goes HTML WAV, which would go to guard whistle, and we'd go set to default, and then it's default.wav. So it's going to play the guard whistle from the HTML, and the name of it is default.wav, and that'll do the exact same thing as what I just showed, just setting it up separately. So I hope that's been good to find out all the information on session creation, at least in this document. There's plenty more that you can go through and discover. I hope that you download the session tutorial or the example tutorial on session creation and give that a go and just see what you can find out and discover. But if you have any questions, make sure you jump onto the forums and ask them away, and we'll try and get back to you on those. Thanks for watching.